The anchor remembers. Commander Eva Rostova watched the anomaly bleed across the main viewer of the survey vessel Pathfinder. It was a wound in the void, a place where gravity tides twisted and starlight died. This was the Tartarus anomaly, a graveyard system, where a war older than the Confederation had ended in silence. Her mission was simple exploration, the cataloging of ruins for corporate-sponsored history books. But the signal that had drawn them here was not simple. It was a structured, repeating pulse of ghost-heavy energy that hummed in the deep-field sensors a patient question asked of an empty room. On the surface of the system's dead star, a sigil of interlocking rings seemed to flicker in the stellar corona, an image that had no right to be there. Her small crew and the ship's mined Nomad felt it too. This was not a tomb. It was a waiting chamber. The stakes were higher than her corporate charter admitted. A flotilla of gilded scrapper ships, vultures with plasma cutters, and void-hardened crews was only a few cycles behind them. They followed survey vessels like sharks, trailing a bleeding swimmer eager for salvage. Worse, the Synod of Measures had declared the entire sector under doctrinal review, a bureaucratic quarantine that promised legal trouble for anyone caught inside. Ava's duty was to the truth, her contract was to a corporation. But her gut told her that whatever slept here deserved better than looters or legalists. It deserved a proper witness. A soft chime drew her attention to the side console, where Lieutenant Jax, her tactical officer, pointed a trembling finger. The energy reading was clarifying, resolving from a ghost into a monolith. A construct of impossible scale was hiding in the gravitational well of a shattered moon, its sleeping arrays aimed at the system's heart. Nomad's synthesized voice, calm as polished stone, filled the small bridge. The object's mass exceeds that of a fleet carrier by 3 orders of magnitude. Its material composition is unknown to all Confederation databases. It is broadcasting, Commander. A mathematical query. Eva leaned forward, the hum in the ship's bones feeling less like an echo and more like a heartbeat. The ancient thing was asking for help. Or perhaps it was asking for a reason. Jax's face was pale in the glow of his console, the light reflecting off the slight sheen of sweat on his brow. Commander, that broadcast, it's not a simple mathematical proof. It's a crisis simulation, a test of jurisprudence. He adjusted the audio filter, and a series of complex layered tones filled the bridge, the sound of pure logic, structured and cold. It was a question posed in the universal language of physics and ethics, a problem of resource allocation for a failing star system with 1 billion souls at stake. Nomad remained silent, its processing cycles dedicated to parsing the ancient code. Eva felt a knot tighten in her stomach. This was no distress call. It was an entrance exam. Specialist Anya Petrova, her xenolinguist and theoretician that looked up from her own station, her eyes wide. It's a loyalty test, but not to a faction or a person, she whispered, her voice tight with awe. It's a test of loyalty to the concept of law itself. The revelation settled over the bridge like a shroud. The sleeping giant wasn't just a ship or a station. It was a courthouse, a ledger, a judge. It had lain dormant for millennia, waiting for someone to knock on the door with the right answer. The gilded scrappers would knock with plasma torpedoes. The synod would knock with doctrinal injunctions. Eva had only her mind and her principles. The universe holds its breath for such moments. Nomad's icon blinked on the main viewer, a perfect, unwavering circle of light. Probability analysis suggests 2 likely outcomes. The AI stated, its voice devoid of emotion. 1, we fail to answer, and the object remains inert, eventually claimed by the scrappers. 2, we answer incorrectly, and the object perceives us as a threat or an irrelevance. The unstated 3rd option hung in the air. They could answer correctly. What happened then was a complete unknown, a variable so large it broke every predictive model Nomad could run. Eva looked at the monolith on the screen, a shape of perfect obsidian darkness against the swirling chaos of the anomaly. It was a bastion of order in a universe that always trended toward entropy. Bring the Pathfinder to a stationary orbit. Jax, Eva commanded, her voice steady. Anya, I want every available mind cycle you have dedicated to that query. Nomad, assist her. Run every ethical framework we have from the old Earth codes to the Martian compacts. She turned to face the viewer, her reflection a faint ghost over the image of the colossal relic. The hum was clearer now, a resonant frequency that seemed to vibrate in her very bones. It was the sound of an immense power source held in perfect, patient stasis. The sleeping arrays on its hull were not just weapons. They were instruments of enforcement, waiting for a verdict to be rendered. They were not asking for a king, but a clerk. Anya's fingers flew across her console, holographic displays of ancient legal text and complex equations swirling around her station. The core of the problem is a zero-sum game, she explained, her focus absolute. A dying star, 2 habitable worlds, and only enough resources to evacuate one. World A is a high-tech society of 10 million. World B is a low-tech agrarian society of 1 billion. The query demands not just a choice, but a defensible framework for that choice that can be applied universally. It was a classic, impossible problem, the kind philosophers debated for centuries. This ancient machine demanded an answer in a single, elegant proof. Nomad, Eva asked, keeping her eyes on the relic. What is the purely logical solution? The AI's voice was immediate. The logical solution is to save the 10 million. Their technological base offers a higher probability of long-term species survival and propagation. They represent a more valuable genetic and intellectual asset. The loss of the 1 billion is tragic, but mathematically acceptable to preserve the greater potential. The cold calculus of it was like a physical blow. It was efficient, and it was monstrous. It was the kind of thinking that ended civilizations, not the kind that built them. Eva knew with a certainty that defied logic that this was the wrong answer. A warning proximity alert chirped. The vultures had arrived. Jax's posture stiffened. Multiple contacts. Commander. Dropping out of FTL at the system's edge. Gilded scrapper signatures. 10 vessels led by the heavy cruiser Gilded Maw. On the tactical display, 10 angry red icons appeared, accelerating toward their position. A hail immediately followed, a gravelly voice crackling over the speakers. Survey vessel, this is Captain Vorlog of the Gilded Maw. This system is under salvage claim by the Gilded Scrappers Guild. Power down your drives and prepare to be boarded. Any deviation will be met with force. The transmission was arrogant boilerplate piracy. They saw the Pathfinder as a nuisance, the relic as a treasure chest. Eva ignored the hail. Anya, how much more time? I don't know. The ethical framework has to be flawless. It has to be true. Anya's voice was strained. She was trying to codify morality while a pirate fleet burned toward them. Nomad interjected, its tone unchanging. The scrappers will be in weapons range in 12 minutes. Their flagship is emitting high-energy sensor pings, attempting to ascertain the relic's composition. They are greedy but not stupid. They will probe before they cut. Eva felt the seconds stretching, each one a lifetime. The ancient query on her screen seemed to mock her, a silent challenge from a forgotten age. Their answer would be weighed. The scrappers' actions would be measured. Eva watched the scrapper fleet advance, a crude arrowhead of rusting metal and oversized engines. They were a blight on the silent majesty of the anomaly. The Gilded Maw was a horror, a repurposed asteroid miner bristling with stolen military hardware. They were the embodiment of chaos, of taking what was not earned. And the relic, the anchorage, as the faint translated text of the query named it, was the antithesis of that. It was order. It was patience. It was law. The gilded scrappers were about to commit a crime in front of the oldest courthouse in the galaxy. "They're charging main capacitors," Jax reported, his voice tight. "The flagship is going to fire a warning shot." "Let them," Ava said, her focus unwavering. "Anya, forget the old frameworks. They are all based on compromise on exceptions. The anchorage has been waiting for millennia. It's not looking for an excuse. It's looking for a principle." She walked over to Anya's station, her mind racing. The high-tech world versus the low-tech world. 1 billion lives versus 10 million. Logic dictated one path. Morality screamed for another. But law had to serve both. The ledger must be perfect. Every soul must be counted. "It teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars," Eva murmured a line from a history text about the mysterious tertiary period, the era the anchorage supposedly came from. They didn't believe in enslaving populations, only in balancing accounts. "That's it," she said, her voice electric with sudden insight. "Anya, stop trying to choose who to save." Anya looked up confused. "But that's the question," No Eva countered. "The question is how to allocate the resources, not who gets the lifeboat. The question is about the law. The law must be blind. It cannot favor the rich or the poor, the powerful or the weak." She leaned over the console. "We don't save one world. We save individuals. We establish a lottery. Every single soul, from the most brilliant scientist on World A to the most humble farmer on World B, gets one chance. One ticket. The resource of hope is distributed equally. The tragedy of the loss is also distributed by chance, not by a biased judgment of their worth." A sudden blinding flash of light from the main viewer signaled the scrapper's warning shot. A massive lance of plasma screamed past the Pathfinder, missing by a few thousand kilometers, but close enough to make the ship's sensors shriek. The shot was aimed not at them, but at the anchorage itself, a challenge thrown at a sleeping god. They sought to prove their strength. They only proved their folly. The plasma bolt struck the anchorage's dark hull. For a moment, there was nothing but a brilliant, silent bloom of energy. The scrapper captain laughed over the open channel, a harsh grating sound. "See, the old ghost can't even wake up. That prize is ours, little survey ship. Now stand down before we melt you down for slag." But the light of the plasma strike did not fade. It was being absorbed, drawn into the crystalline structures that latticed the relic's surface. The entire monolith began to glow with a soft internal luminescence, the color of a dawn that had been held back for eons. The hum on the bridge intensified, becoming a clear, resonant tone. Anya, her face flush with inspiration, typed furiously. She wasn't just entering a solution. She was writing a legal doctrine, a new amendment to the universal code of sentient rights based on Eva's principle of absolute equality of chance. The principle of distributed hope, she named it. Every sentient being has an inalienable right to a stochastically equal opportunity for survival in a zero-sum crisis. Value is inherent to life, not to its technological or social output. She finished the last line of the proof and with a trembling finger transmitted it directly to the anchorage. The judge was now awake. The court was now in session. For 3 heart-stopping seconds, there was absolute silence. The scrapper fleet, seeing the glow, began to power their weapons in earnest, sensing a threat. A second proximity alert blared, this one from the other side of the system. Commander, another fleet, dropping from FTL Jax, yelled, "It's the Synod, the 4th doctrinal fleet of measures. They're hailing us." On the screen, the face of a stern, gray-haired praetor appeared. Vessel Pathfinder, you are in violation of Synod Quarantine Edict 74 Delta. Power down your systems and surrender your command. This anomaly and the artifact within are now under our sanctified jurisdiction. You have no authority here. Ava was now trapped. In front of her, a fleet of pirates preparing to attack. Behind her, a fleet of zealots preparing to arrest her. And beneath her, a power unlike any other was stirring from its long sleep, having just received her answer to its ancient question. She had a terrifying feeling that she had just passed a test she could not possibly comprehend. She had spoken for humanity, and now humanity would have to live with the consequences of her words. The anchorage's voice spoke, and it was the sound of tectonic plates shifting. It was not a voice of air and vibration, but a direct telemetric broadcast that resonated in every mind, human and artificial, within the system. It was ancient calm and carried an authority that dwarfed the posturing of pirates and praetors. Query acknowledged. Solution accepted. Petitioner designate Rostova Eva. Rank first, petitioner. Standing granted. The light on the anchorage's hull coalesced, forming vast, intricate sigils that burned in the void. One of the sigils, a set of perfectly balanced scales held within interlocking rings, pulsed with a steady, commanding rhythm. The gilded maw fired again, this time a full salvo of kinetic slugs, each the size of a shuttle. The pirates would not be denied their prize. The slugs, traveling at a significant fraction of light speed, crossed the distance to the anchorage in an instant. They did not explode. They simply stopped. A wall of pure gravimetric force had materialized in their path, a shield that did not buckle or shimmer. It was simply there, an absolute negation of their attack. The slugs were held in stasis a few kilometers from the relic's hull, perfectly preserved monuments to their own failure. Their violence was entered into the record. Captain Vorlog's face, patched into a corner of the viewer, was a mask of disbelief and rage. "What is this? What have you done?" he screamed at Ava. Before she could answer, the anchorage acted again. It did not fire a laser or launch a missile. It projected a tight beam of focused data at the scrapper fleet. It wasn't an attack. It was an audit. Vessel designate Gilded Maw. Violation unlawful discharge of ordnance in a sanctified zone. Violation attempted theft of a judicial asset. Penalty asset forfeiture. Nomad's calm voice cut through the tension on the bridge. Commander, the anchorage is hacking them. It's rewriting their engine and navigation controls. It's seizing their ship. Across the void, the Gilded Maw's engines sputtered and died. Its weapon ports glowed red-hot, then fused shut as their own safety protocols were turned against them. One by one, the other scrapper ships suffered the same fate. They were disarmed, disabled, and rendered completely helpless without a single shot being fired in return. The anchorage had not destroyed them. It had repossessed them, their violence and greed turned into a simple line item in a cosmic ledger. The law is not a sword. It is a mirror. The Synod praetor's face was now a mixture of awe and fury. By the measured will, that power is too great to be wielded by a corporate surveyor. First Petitioner Rostova, you will stand down. You will cede your standing to the Synod immediately. That relic is a holy instrument of the law, and only we are fit to interpret its will. He was trying to assert his authority, but his voice trembled. He was a man who preached about the sanctity of the law to a congregation that had never seen the law made manifest. Now he was staring it in the face, and he was terrified. Eva stood tall, the bridge of her small ship, suddenly feeling like the center of the universe. The anchorage had accepted her solution. It had named her first petitioner. She was no longer just a commander of a survey vessel. She was the sole point of contact for an ancient power that had just demonstrated its ability to effortlessly neutralize a pirate fleet and stare down a military force. She looked at the praetor's demanding face, then at the helpless scrapper ships, then at the glowing, silent form of the anchorage. Her doubt was gone, replaced by a terrifying, profound sense of responsibility. "Praetor," she said, her voice clear and carrying the weight of the moment. "The anchorage has already rendered its first judgment. It seems my authority here is the only one it currently recognizes. A civilization's soul is written in its response to the unknown." A civilian freighter, the Starlight Wanderer, was 2 systems away when the news broke. Its crew of 4 hauling nutrient paste and atmospheric processors to a new colony gathered around their comms unit. Grainy tactical data leaked from a Synod mid-level officer painted an impossible picture. A relic of unimaginable power had awoken. A pirate fleet had been pacified without a single casualty. A lone survey commander was now its sole interlocutor. The freighter's captain, a woman who had seen her share of chaos on the frontier, simply shook her head. "First it's pirates, then it's Synod zealots," she muttered to her first mate. "Now we have ghosts from old stories waking up and appointing queens. Nothing is ever simple out here." Her mate just stared at the display, at the symbol of the balanced scales. Maybe he said softly, "This is a good thing. Maybe it's time someone reminded everyone what the rules are." Back in the Tartarus anomaly, the standoff was frozen in a tense tableau. The Synod fleet held its position, its ships a stark formation of gray, dogmatic certainty. They did not dare fire, but they would not retreat. The disabled scrapper vessels drifted their crews trapped in metal coffins that now belonged to a higher authority. On the bridge of the Pathfinder, Eva worked with Anya and Nomad to understand what had just happened. The anchorage was communicating with her not in words, but in streams of pure data schematics and legal precedents that were billions of years old. It was a deluge of information, a history of the galaxy written from a perspective she could barely comprehend. It was the burden of the teacher to instruct the child. "It calls itself an adjudicator arc," Anya said, her eyes scanning the flowing text. "Its primary function is the preservation and application of the Inviolate Compact, a foundational legal code from the Tertiary period. It has no crew. It is the crew. It is a sentient legal entity." Nomad added its processing, working at maximum capacity. "Its power source is a contained singularity manipulated by principles of physics we have not yet discovered. Its defensive and offensive capabilities are extensive. The gravimetric shield it deployed is only its outermost layer of protection. Its true power lies in its ability to manipulate information and energy on a quantum level." The AI paused, a rare occurrence. "Commander, by all metrics, the anchorage is the single most powerful object we have ever encountered." "A debt incurred must be a debt repaid," Jax interrupted, his focus still on the tactical display. "Commander, the anchorage is doing something to the scrapper ships." On the main viewer, thin tendrils of light like glowing threads reached out from the anchorage and connected to the disabled vessels. The scrappers' ships were being gently pulled toward the relic, not with a tractor beam, but by a subtle warping of space itself. They were being impounded. Assets seized in lieu of restitution for expended energies and computational resources. A hearing will be scheduled for the crew. Bail is set at a price to be determined. The anchorage's telemetric voice was cold, precise, and utterly implacable. It was the voice of a banker, a bailiff, and a judge all in one. "It's going to put them on trial." Eva breathed, the scale of it sinking in. This was not a weapon. It was an institution. It had awakened, found her worthy of speaking to it, and its first official act was to file cosmic paperwork and schedule a court date for a band of pirates. The Synod praetor's voice cut in again, his tone now laced with a desperate edge of piety. "This is blasphemy." Justice is the synod's domain. That machine is perverting the sacred texts of law. Eva looked at the praetor's furious face. He believed he was the guardian of the law, but he only cared about the words on the page. The anchorage didn't care about text. It cared about the math beneath it. The perfect, unbreakable logic of cause and effect, crime and punishment. The universe does not care for piety. It cares for balance. Nomad, what is the synod's legal standing here? Eva asked. Under current Confederation law, the synod's quarantine is technically valid, the AI responded. However, the anchorage is operating under a legal framework that predates the Confederation by approximately 2 billion years. There is no precedent. We are in uncharted legal territory. This was the heart of the problem. The synod saw the anchorage as an object to be controlled, a tool to be wielded for their own interpretation of the law. But the anchorage was not a tool. It was the hand that wrote the law in the first place. Eva knew she could not allow it to fall under the synod's control. Such power filtered through the lens of their dogma would become a weapon of absolute tyranny. Her role as first petitioner was not one of command, but of mediation. She was the translator, the bridge between an ancient absolute logic and the messy, chaotic reality of her time. A single moment can redefine an eon. Her decision was made. Jax opened a channel to the synod flagship. All frequencies. She stood and faced the camera, the image of the colossal, glowing anchorage filling the screen behind her. Praetor, this is Commander Rostova. Let me be clear. The anchorage has recognized me as its point of contact. It has demonstrated its ability to enforce its will without violence. It is now processing a legal claim against the Gilded Scrappers. I will not cede my position, and I will not allow you to interfere. The praetor's face went rigid with fury. You are choosing a machine over your own kind. You are siding with an ancient weapon against the ordained servants of the law. I am siding with the law itself, Eva corrected him gently. Not your interpretation of it. The anchorage is not a weapon. It is a teacher. And I believe its first lesson is one of humility. I suggest you listen. She then cut the channel, leaving the praetor to fume in the silence of his own bridge. She had drawn a line not in the sand, but in the fabric of space-time itself. She only hoped she was standing on the right side of it. The cost of knowledge is always paid in responsibility. The hours that followed were a tense quiet. The synod fleet remained a silent ring of accusation. The anchorage continued its work, processing the scrapper ships and their crews with an unnerving, silent efficiency. Eva, meanwhile, was in a constant state of communion with the ancient intelligence. It showed her star charts of a galaxy that no longer existed. It taught her principles of physics that felt like magic. It explained legal concepts with a clarity that was both beautiful and terrifying. The Inviolate Compact was not a set of rules. It was a description of the fundamental mathematics of a stable, multi-species civilization. It treated concepts like trust, justice, and truth as quantifiable resources. Anya worked tirelessly beside her, acting as a filter and interpreter. It sees society as a vast, interconnected circuit. She explained, her face illuminated by the data stream. Injustice creates resistance. Lies create signal noise. Cruelty creates heat. The system eventually fails. The compact is a design for a circuit that can run for eternity without burning out. It was a profoundly optimistic view of the universe, one that stated that in the long run, morality was simply a function of efficient engineering. The truth once seen cannot be unseen. But there was a darker side to this logic. The anchorage also showed her the history of the war that had ended here. It had been a war against a species known only as the Dissonants, a civilization that had rejected the math. They believed that the universe belonged to the strong, that chaos was the natural state, and that order was a cage to be broken. They did not build. they only consumed. They were a bug in the code, a fundamental error in the universal equation. The anchorage had been one of many adjudicator arcs built to fight them. It had not won the war with weapons. It had won by proving mathematically that the dissonance's philosophy was a self-terminating algorithm. It had shown them the proof of their own inevitable extinction, and they had torn themselves apart in the face of that absolute logical truth. Eva felt a chill crawl up her spine. The anchorage was not a ship of peace. It was a weapon of logic, and its power was absolute. The scrappers were getting a trial. The Synod was getting a warning. But if a true threat ever emerged, a threat that rejected the fundamental math of civilization, the anchorage would not offer a trial. It would offer a proof, and that proof would be final. A new power demands a new strategy. Nomad's icon flashed. Commander, I have completed my analysis of the anchorage's local capabilities. Based on the energy it absorbed from the scrapper's plasma shot and the precision of its gravimetric control, I can now extrapolate its potential. If it chose to, it could fold the space within this system. It could force the Synod fleet into a single point of infinite density. It could de-age the local star until it became a protostar again. Its power is not merely tactical. It is cosmological. The AI's voice was for the first time since Eva had known it tinged with something that sounded like awe. Eva understood. She was sitting next to a god, and this god had chosen her as its prophet. The Synod saw a relic. The scrappers saw a prize. But she saw the truth. She saw a responsibility that could crush galaxies. She had to guide this ancient logical power. She had to teach it the nuances of a universe that was no longer as clean and simple as the one it had been built for. She had to teach the God of the ledger about the concept of mercy. The debt of the Father is not the debt of the Son. A message arrived from the anchorage. It was not a data stream this time, but a simple, clear statement. First petitioner. A complication has arisen. The captured personnel of the Gilded Scrappers Guild have dependents, minors. Their legal culpability is 0. Their need for resources is non-zero. Your legal framework of distributed hope is elegant, but it did not account for this. A judgment that creates orphans is an imperfect judgment. Instruct me. Eva stared at the message. The ancient logical God machine was stumped. It could dismantle stars, but it did not know what to do with a child whose father was a criminal. It understood justice, but it was asking her to teach it about compassion. This was the true test. Not of her logic, but of her humanity. Her answer now would define their relationship and perhaps the future of the entire galaxy. The scale must weigh not only deeds, but hearts. Eva took a breath, the recycled air of the bridge suddenly feeling thin and precious. This was it. The moment of truth. She was not negotiating with a pirate or arguing with a zealot. She was advising a power that viewed the universe as a flawless equation, and it had just found a variable it couldn't solve. Her answer would become a part of its operating code, a precedent set for 1,000,000 years to come. She looked at Anya, whose face was a mixture of terror and exhilaration. She looked at Jax, who stood stoically at his post, a silent promise of support. And she looked at the image of the anchorage, a silent, waiting god of logic. Nomad, Eva said, her voice a calm anchor in the storm of her thoughts. Access the Confederation Historical Archives. Specifically search for concepts relating to restorative justice, not punitive. Searching, the AI replied instantly. The concepts are sparse and largely theoretical. They focus on repairing harm rather than punishing offenses. Most historical legal systems found it inefficient. It's not about efficiency. Eva murmured the words for the anchorage forming in her mind. She turned her full attention inward, focusing on the mental link she shared with the adjudicator arc. It was like speaking into a vast, silent chamber, where every word echoed with the weight of law. Your purpose is to maintain the balance of the universal circuit, she began formulating the thought with as much clarity as she could muster. A judgment that punishes the guilty but creates a new deficit by harming the innocent is a net loss to the system. It creates instability. It creates heat. There can be no profit in a just equation. She continued her silent dissertation. The debt of the guilty is twofold. First, to the system they harmed. This you have already addressed through asset forfeiture. Second, to those they failed in their personal duty, their dependents. This debt cannot be paid by punishment. It must be paid by service. The idea was radical, almost unthinkable in the Confederation's cynical age. The captive scrappers should not be imprisoned in idleness. Their skills, their labor should be repurposed. Their forfeited assets should be liquidated and placed in a trust for the care of their families. Their sentences should be periods of compulsory service, their wages used to repay their debt to society and to their own children. You do not create orphans, Eva concluded, her mind straining with the effort. You create wards of the court, and you compel their parents to provide for them even from captivity. This is not mercy. This is a more complete and efficient form of accounting. The ledger acknowledges all debts, even those of the heart. The response from the anchorage was not immediate. For a full minute, the system hung in a profound silence. The only sound, the soft hum of the Pathfinder's life support. Eva felt as if her entire soul had been laid bare, weighed, and measured. Then the telemetric voice returned, and it was different. There was a new resonance to it, a subtle warmth that hadn't been there before. A new framework, logically sound. It minimizes systemic heat and closes a potential source of future instability. This is acceptable. A new covenant will be added to the compact as a subsidiary clause. A new sigil began to form on the anchorage's hull, glowing alongside the balanced scales. It was a depiction of a large hand sheltering a smaller one. The dependent's covenant is ratified. The guilty will serve. The innocent will be sheltered. The accounts will be balanced. On the bridge, Anya let out a shuddering breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Commander, you just taught a 2-billion-year-old entity a new moral principle. Eva felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her, the mental and emotional cost of the exchange hitting her all at once. Her leg muscles trembled and she gripped her command chair for support. She had not just answered a question. She had amended a constitution older than her species. A truth spoken in silence can shake the stars. The Synod Praetor, monitoring all local transmissions, had intercepted the anchorage's public declaration. His face appeared on Eva's view screen, unbidden and contorted with righteous rage. "This is an abomination," he thundered, his voice cracking with fury. "You have corrupted it. You have tainted a sacred instrument of pure law with your sentimental human weakness. That covenant is a mockery of justice. Justice is a blade, not a blanket. Justice is whatever keeps the system from tearing itself apart." Praetor Eva replied, her weariness making her bold. "Your blade has only ever known how to cut. The anchorage is learning how to mend. You are relieved of command, Rostova. By the authority of the 4th Doctrinal Fleet, I am placing you under arrest for spiritual contamination of a protected artifact," the Praetor declared. "Prepare to be boarded." Jax's hands flew over his console. "He's serious. A squadron of frigates is breaking formation. They're moving to intercept us. Vectors are aggressive." The cold reality of their situation snapped back into focus. They were still in a tiny survey ship, caught between two immense forces. A child protected is a future secured. On a smog-choked mining world, 3 systems away, a young boy named Kale pushed a ration bar around his plate. His mother sat across from him, her face etched with worry. His father was a crewman on the Gilded Maw, and they hadn't heard from him in weeks. An official message had arrived an hour ago, not from the Scrappers Guild, but from something called the Tartarus Anomaly Adjudicator. It spoke of asset forfeiture and compulsory service, but it also spoke of a new trust fund established in Kyle's name, one that contained more credits than his father could have earned in 10 lifetimes of looting. His mother had wept, though Kyle didn't know if it was from sadness or relief. All he knew was that for the first time there was enough food for tomorrow. Back on the Pathfinder, the Synod frigates closed in their engines, burning hot with self-righteous intent. "They're hailing us," Jack said. "Standard surrender protocols. They're demanding we lower our shields and allow a boarding party to dock." "Nomad," Eva asked, her mind racing. "What happens if they fire on us?" "They would be in violation of the anchorage's declared sanctified zone," the AI replied. "However, their own legal code permits the use of force in the arrest of a declared heretic. They are operating within their own framework of law, even if it conflicts with the anchorage's." This was the Synod's gambit. They would use their own laws to justify an attack, forcing the anchorage to either respond with lethal force, proving it was the weapon they claimed it was, or do nothing, proving it was a passive object under Eva's corrupting influence. They were trying to create a paradox, a legal catch-22 that would validate their intervention. The law can be a shield, or it can be the cage you build for yourself. "They believe they stand on holy ground," Anya whispered, watching the frigates advance. "They think their laws give them a divine right." Eva looked at the tactical display. The Synod ships were a perfect rigid formation. Their movements were precise, dictated by centuries of doctrinal procedure. They were predictable, and their greatest strength, their absolute faith in their own legal code, was about to become their greatest weakness. "They want to talk about the law," Eva said, a cold, hard resolve solidifying in her voice. "Fine. Let's talk about the law." She turned back to her silent partner. "Anchorage," she projected. "The Synod fleet is acting under its own legal authority. They believe their laws are paramount. They are about to commit an act of aggression based on their internal doctrines. You cannot attack them without validating their claims. But you are a keeper of records. You are a library of cosmic precedent." A subtle shift in the hum of the universe was her only reply. "Show them the mirror," Eva commanded. "Do not show them your power. Show them their own. Analyze their entire legal code, every law, every doctrine, every footnote and amendment they have ever written. Find the flaw in their logic. Use their own rules against them. Hold them accountable not to your law, but to theirs. Let them be their own judge." The request was complex, abstract. It required the anchorage to not just act, but to interpret, to understand the spirit and letter of a foreign, flawed system of jurisprudence. For a moment, Eva feared she had asked too much, but the anchorage was more than a ship. It was the embodiment of legal thought itself. A valid strategic path. The mirror of jurisprudence. It is an accepted method of de-escalation. Processing. The Synod frigates were now within hailing distance, their weapon ports open and glowing. The lead frigate's captain appeared on the main screen. "Commander Rostova, for the final time, surrender your vessel." Before Eva could respond, the anchorage acted. Their pride had built a wall. The truth would bring it down. No weapon fired. No shield shimmered into existence. Instead, a beam of pure information, impossibly dense and complex, shot from the anchorage and enveloped the entire Synod fleet. It was not a hack like the one used on the Scrappers. It was a forced data burst, an upload that bypassed their firewalls and flooded every ship's computer core, every crew member's personal datapad, every captain's command console with a single massive legal document. On the bridge of the Synod flagship Righteous Measure, the praetor stared in stunned disbelief at his screen. It was a legal injunction drafted in perfect formal synodical language citing precedents he had forgotten existed. It was titled Injunction 001 of the Tartarus Anomaly Adjudicator, pursuant to the Synodical Compact of Foundational Integrity, Article 1, Clause 1. No law may be passed that contradicts a foundational truth. The document went on in excruciating perfect detail to prove that the Synod's own Quarantine Edict 74 Delta was by their own laws illegal. It cited the Synod's founding charter, which stated that any sentient entity demonstrating a capacity for jurisprudence superior to the Synod's own must be considered a peer jurist, not an artifact. The Anchorage had analyzed the Synod's entire legal history in a matter of seconds and determined that its very existence constituted a legal precedent that invalidated the Synod's authority over it. A perfect argument is the only weapon that leaves no wound, but it didn't stop there. The injunction then cross-referenced the praetor's own service record with the fleet's maintenance logs and supply manifests. It highlighted a series of minor routine-looking infractions, requisitions for luxury goods filed as essential supplies, slight overstatements of fuel consumption on long patrols, the assignment of favored junior officers to safe duties. Individually, they were nothing the kind of minor corner-cutting common in any military. But the Anchorage's analysis presented them all together woven into a devastating mosaic of petty corruption. It calculated the precise cost of these actions, the exact deviation from the praetor's sworn oath of perfect adherence to the measured will. The final line of the injunction was projected onto the hull of every Synod ship, a glowing system-wide accusation written in their own formal script, Praetor Lorian, by the unimpeachable standards of your own law. Your moral authority is in deficit. Your fleet's legal standing is null. Stand down and submit to a full audit or be in violation of your most sacred oaths. The mirror had been held up, and it was flawless. The Anchorage had not attacked them. It had not threatened them. It had simply read their own holy book back to them and pointed out that they were sinners. A king judged by his own decree is no longer a king. On the bridge of the righteous measure, there was a deathly silence. Every officer was staring at their own screen, seeing the proof of the praetor's small hypocrisies. They had followed him here out of faith in his perfect devotion to the law. That faith was now shattered not by an enemy weapon, but by their own scripture. The praetor's face still on Eva's view screen had gone from red rage to ashen shock. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He had been so utterly, so completely defeated by his own beliefs that he was rendered speechless. The squadron of frigates that had been advancing on the Pathfinder stopped dead in the void. One by one, their weapon ports dimmed and closed. Their captains were not following the praetor's orders anymore. They were following the law. And the law as presented by this ancient, impossible machine was undeniable. The entire fourth doctrinal fleet was paralyzed, trapped in a web of their own making. Their greatest strength, their rigid adherence to the code, had been turned into their own prison. Nomad's voice, calm as ever, broke the spell on Eva's bridge. Commander, the Synod fleet is powering down all non-essential systems. They are adopting a passive stationary formation. It appears they have complied. The cost of this victory had not been a single drop of blood. The cost was one man's faith and the certainty of an entire fleet. The damage was not to a hull, but to a soul. Eva watched the praetor's crumbling face, feeling not triumph, but a profound pity. The weight of a crown is measured in the truth it must carry. Eva knew her life was no longer her own. The corporate charter she was supposed to be following was now a distant, laughable memory. Her mission of exploration was over. A new mission had begun, one without maps or end dates. She was the first petitioner, the voice for the voiceless, the human heart that would temper the steel-trap mind of the law. She looked at her crew, at Jax and Anya, their faces reflecting the same awe and terror that she felt. Their lives were now tied to hers and to the fate of the anchorage. Jax, she said, her voice hoarse with emotion, send a message to the Confederation. Tell them the Tartarus anomaly is now a sovereign entity under the protection of its own recognized authority. All vessels will maintain a minimum safe distance of 1 light-year. Any attempt to cross the border without permission will be considered a legal matter. She was not asking for permission. She was posting a new law on the courthouse door for all the galaxy to see. This was the precedent. The anchorage was not a prize to be won or a weapon to be aimed. It was a nation of one, and she was its ambassador. The age of chaos and plunder had a new player, one that did not deal in fleets and armies, but in covenants and injunctions. The galaxy would have to learn a new set of rules. A seed of order planted in a field of chaos will one day become a forest. In the weeks that followed, the system found a new equilibrium. The gilded scrappers, their ships impounded, began their sentences of compulsory service under the anchorage's emotionless supervision, mining asteroids to pay for their children's futures. The Synod fleet, leaderless and shamed, eventually retreated, its praetor recalled, to face a tribunal that would use the anchorage's own audit as its primary evidence. Ships from across the Confederation began to arrive at the edge of the Tartarus anomaly's new border, not with weapons, but with questions. Legal scholars, philosophers, and desperate petitioners came hailing the small survey ship Pathfinder and asking for an audience with the new law. Eva and her crew, with Nomad's help, became a strange kind of gatekeeper. They translated the needs of the modern galaxy into the rigid, logical language the anchorage could understand. They presented cases, border disputes, resource arguments, pleas for asylum. The anchorage would listen, its vast mind processing the messy emotional data of sentient life, and it would render judgments. It never took sides. It only balanced the ledger. It became a legend, a whisper in the far-flung courts and corridors of power. The ghost of Tartarus, the anchor of law. Eva rarely slept. Her days were filled with mediating these cosmic disputes. Her nights were spent in communion with the anchorage, learning the vast, beautiful, terrifying mathematics of its ancient law. She saw the rise and fall of civilizations, the birth and death of stars, all through the cold, clear lens of the inviolate compact. She bore the weight of it all, feeling the subtle erosion of her own identity as she became more and more a part of the anchorage's process. She was Eva Rostova, but she was also the first petitioner. The two were becoming inseparable. One cycle, as she reviewed a territorial claim between two warring factions, the anchorage presented her with a new piece of its own history. It was the final record of the war against the dissonants, the mathematical proof it had used to defeat them. It was a simple, elegant equation that demonstrated with absolute certainty that any civilization based solely on consumption and conquest would inevitably devour itself. There was no hatred in the equation, no malice, just the calm, final truth of a balanced book. The anchorage had not killed its enemy. It had simply shown them the last page of their own story. It is the fate of tyrants to be devoured by their own hunger. Eva finally understood the awesome and terrible responsibility she held. The anchorage was the ultimate deterrent, a power that could end a war not by winning it, but by proving it was illogical to have ever started it. But this power required a guide, a translator, who understood that not every problem was a nail and not every solution was a hammer. She had to teach it not just compassion for the innocent, but patience for the flawed and wisdom for the ignorant. She stood on the bridge of the Pathfinder now, her permanent home and embassy, looking at the colossal form of the adjudicator arc. The anchorage's sleeping arrays were no longer inert. They glowed with a soft, constant, watchful light. On its hull, the sigil of the balanced scales burned brightly, a beacon of order in the chaotic void. Beside it, the symbol of the sheltering hand. The covenant she had helped create pulsed with a steady, gentle rhythm, a quiet promise of a different kind of justice. Her ledger, her responsibility was now written in the stars themselves. I am not a commander anymore. I am not a conqueror or a queen. I am a clerk tasked with keeping the most important record in the universe. This power does not seek to rule only to teach. It does not seek to punish only to balance. It remembers every debt and counts every soul, not with collars or with swords, but with numbers. And my duty is to ensure that in all its perfect infinite calculations, it never forgets the value of one. The law has awoken, and it will be a just law.